Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we're picking up where last week's episode went off, ended with like them going into them jumping again without their control, and it's like, oh crap, we're heading towards the vortex. This is crazy. Oh, all the stuff goes wrong. Mac gets blind. Yo-Yo gets locked in a Quinjet. They go to see Simmons about the whole thing, and it's just like everything's just kind of going wrong. And then like there's fires, and Daisy goes to put it out, and then she gets reset. And I'm like, oh, we're time looping it. The moment it happened, I was like, we're in a time loop. I even love, it's just a little thing I thought was kind of interesting. They actually played the title card a second time. I've never seen a show do that before. I mean, usually like, even if the time looping is part of the cold opening, it's like you see the title card once. Like, I've never seen a show do that before. Because obviously there's a few shows out there that have done the time loop thing. I'm never going to be against a time loop episode. But what I think is so interesting is, I mean, I think every show kind of remixes it in their own way. Because obviously, like, certain shows have different, rules for time travel and stuff like that. I want to say the most recent one I saw, I want to say might have been the Legends of Tomorrow one. I feel like there's been one more recently that I've talked about. I just don't remember. But I think the Legends of Tomorrow one, which was back in season 3, I think. Yeah. It's the most recent one I've seen, maybe. Regardless, tangents and all that. But the fact of the matter is, I think this show did a very good job of doing, a typical like time travel story. Once again, it doesn't always have to be time travel, because look at Supernatural. Its situation was kind of based around Dean getting killed, which that was definitely season 3, because Sam had to relive like Dean literally dying over and over again in many different ways. So that wasn't necessarily time travel wise, but like it wasn't a time travel thing that created that. This time loop came about because of time travel, regardless, tangents and all that. But nevertheless, I love Daisy like being like, crap, I'm in a time loop. They're trying to find a way around it, and she's the only one that knows, and she's the one that kind of figures it out. It's like this conversation, this, and then all of a sudden she goes and wakes Coulson up. She's like, you're not gonna believe this. He's like, you're in a time loop. I know. And I was like, who do you know? Do you remember? And it turns out he's like, we've actually been through this a couple times. Each time. This is where I think they got it really interesting, like them remixing their own time loop, is that basically every time Daisy dies, she restarts the loop. Her memory disappears, and she starts at the beginning of the loop again. And I thought that was so interesting, because usually like if someone ends up dying, it's like, oh, it's not too bad, because I'll just restart the loop, But it's like, for her, her dying is actually the worst thing, because she forgets everything. I was like, that's such an interesting little twist to, the time loop thing. And for him, it's like, because she's like, I died again. He's like, yeah, and every time you say it just like that, he's like, and you know what's so annoying is the fact of the matter is, who's the one that has to explain it to you every time, because he's like, I'm the one that's powered down, and so I have to be powered up every time. He's like, I'm sorry, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. I was like, I like that he was kind of getting frustrated by the whole thing, because I thought that was so fascinating, because it turns out she's died 14 times. It's like, wait, so how many times have we done the whole loop thing? He's like, 87. He's like, at least that's how much I'm aware of, because, I'm powered down, so who knows how many we went through before you actually came to wake me up, So I was like, I love him because I'm frustrated about it. I love that. So now it's a thing of them, trying, and then he's kind of running through. I love that we don't see all the attempts, because it's like, no, all those attempts literally, because that's so interesting, because usually that's part of the show. Like, we did get a quick montage of, you do the Groundhog thing day of trying to, well, this is obviously a more like, I mean, because different shows do that. Like, obviously, like I said, like they try to keep it a little more serious, so it's not just like, oh, fun and games. It's like, we're literally all going to die, so I have to find a way to save us type of situation. And the fact is, all the like ways of going about it, it's like, no, we've literally the show, like, we as the audience picking up here on like loop 80, 90, whatever, picking up on the loop that we're starting at the beginning of the show, it's like, all those other like ways of figuring this out, oh, we've literally already done them, kind of led to you dying sometimes. So I just thought that was just such an interesting aspect to it. Then there's the whole situation of trying to, okay, so how, they figured like it had to be like, maybe the reason why they in particular remember is because they were both in futuristic, basically sleeping tanks, him powered down in one, her recovering in one. And then you have Daisy having to explain everything about, like, okay, like, she's breaking it down to everyone. All right, we're in a time loop. And I like that, too. It's not a thing of everyone's just kind of like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, it's a situation where, like, most people are just like, all right, well, you know what's going down, like, you know. Luckily for Mac, I was about to say lucky for Mac, he only got blinded once. It's like, no, every time Daisy forgot, he got blinded. Because even Coulson says that later on, Mac got blinded a couple times. So the fact of the matter is, so I just thought that was just kind of the sucky situations that end up happening to everyone. I feel like, well, Matt got it hard, and apparently it happens with Gemma because, like, obviously there's a whole thing of, like, because the point I was making, right, is I thought it was interesting, like, Gemma was the only one that was like, how do we know that this time loop thing is real? She's the only one that's hesitant to believe. Everyone else is like, all right, we're on board. But, you know, it's like, all right, you think of a random word is what Daisy said, and then, like, her and Gemma said at the same time, it's like, okay, yeah, we've already been through this. I like, because I love that, like, when we got to that point, it's like, oh, they've already been through this, so we don't even get the point. We don't even get to see her being like, all right, you said that word, all right, I'm gonna start the next loop with that word. It's like, nope, we've already been through this. I already know the word you're about to say. And I love that, and that's interesting. Like, I mean, it makes sense, but because it's like for you, because it never changed. Because obviously, why would the word change? Because you're like, all right, this is the first random word that came to my mind. I mean, it's not your fault that you don't remember that you picked this word every single time. I think it's so interesting. I mean, it makes it simple because they end up figuring out, because they end up following Deke, because, like, the only person who can potentially, you know, fix all this would be Gemma, but obviously she doesn't remember. So Deke is like, hey, maybe take out the drive, take out the machine for a little bit so that you can remember. And when you remember, you know, you might be able to fix the drive or whatever. But then, like, Coulson and Daisy had followed him there, and there was this whole conversation. But then it turns into, like, not just simply removing the device. It turns into, like, a time loop murder mystery. I like that for a little bit because it's like, wait, Gemma starts coughing. I'm like, what the hell is that about? And then Daisy goes in there with her in the next loop, but then it's gas, and they both died. And then it's just like, it's so interesting because, like, Coulson was so frustrated because he also knew what this meant. That meant Daisy died for a 15th time, and that means I'm going to have to explain this all over again. So, you know, it was kind of annoying for him. It's like, I love it. She's like, I died. He's like, yes, I'm not trying to, he's like, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to minimize your pain. She's like, fair, I get it. I've died a couple of times. You have to explain it every time. She's like, I actually kind of get it. So I thought that was kind of neat. But then it's like, the whole thing actually starts presenting a very interesting situation because it's like trying to understand, like, well, the fact of the matter is someone tried to murder you, and it's like, all right, we lined the suspects up. Is it Enoch? Is it Gemma? Is it Deke? The whole thing about, like, you know, it's one of you, like, what? Like, whatever this is, it's about protecting this huge secret. So amongst you guys, like, it must be one of you that did it because, like, you're the only ones that are aware about this whole, you know, situation with Gemma. I even love Deke being like, wait, how do you know? He's like, please, was it me? He's like, please tell me it wasn't me. He's like, because, I mean, in his defense, he wasn't the one that technically leaked the secret. I mean, technically he was because he led them to Gemma while they were having that conversation. So it's like, it technically was on him. But at the same time, it's like, it's not 100% your fault. You know, it's just kind of like, you know, I mean, under the circumstances, it's like these secrets, we can't really be keeping them considering everything that's going down, you know, because it's like, because I thought what's interesting too, because, like, every time, obviously, they loop, they're getting closer and closer to the vortex until, like, it's not like, oh, we'll just die or, you know, we'll disappear. It's like, no, we'll cease to have basically ever existed. So probably, like, in that moment, like, the moment you'll disappear there and you'll also disappear all across time, which, in a sense, if they do that, that will probably unravel so much of history because obviously S.H.I.E.L.D. has played a big role over everything they've done over the course of the series, which includes saving the world on a few occasions, you know? So there's, like, you know, levels upon levels to how that whole thing could, like, ripple out. But it's like, all right, it's not them. So then becomes a question of, like, well, who else on the ship might be the killer? Because even I was starting to think, like, do you think it could be Coulson? Coulson just seems a little weird, but to be fair, he was off the entire episode because it's just like he remembers everything, and he also it's like because he also, once again, and I think this is such an interesting aspect of his character is that he's the one having, like, the existential crisis because of him, and that's what made me kind of think, like, oh, are we Legends of Tomorrowing this? Because spoilers for Legends of Tomorrow, its time loop episode was a simulation. It was basically Gideon's way to kind of make Zari kind of get closer to the team. in this case, I was wondering, it's like this was like a Chronicom thing because it was meant to be like, I was like, because you could look at the metaphor there where it's like, oh, here's Coulson who keeps on going while everyone around him dies. I was like, oh yeah, like the moment he mentioned, I was like, yeah, it's literally a metaphor for your situation, like, because you're going to have to literally watch everyone you care about die, like, you know, which even, you know, Daisy was like, no, I get it, like what it's like to watch someone you care about die over and over again. He's like, my situation's different because for him it's like he keeps going and he has to watch them all die one by one. Like even if it wasn't just these circumstances, him being what he is now, because he's like, if I even have a, you know, because for him it's like seeing them die over and over again, it's heartbreaking because he doesn't want to see Daisy die. He doesn't want to see any of them die. He loves them. This is his family, and the fact of the matter is, but for him it's like it's soul wrenching. Even if I have a soul, she's like, of course you have a soul. He's like, don't say of course. I'm a machine, you know, because he's like, I'm not the person I was, you know. I'm this thing, and I was like, that was actually so heartbreaking to see him kind of very existential because now he's wondering, like, you know, maybe there's some coding in him, and then that's what made him think, wait, Enoch is what made him. It's like Enoch's behind all this. It's like you don't remember because, like, obviously, like, there might be some programming inside of you that makes it so that because I'm actually skipping over quite a bit because, like, there's a whole thing about, like, Daniel sacrificing himself because, like, Daisy had known, like, Deke's cologne had been moved from the drawer. It's like, why would it be? It moved in its different space, which Daniel was like, it had to be a trap. He's like, so I'll come back. So just, you know, let me be the one to do it. Because obviously it's more of a hassle if you die because you literally have to lose your memories when this whole loop restarts. I'll be fun, you know, I'll just, you know, come back. So he ended up sacrificing himself for Daisy, which comes as no surprise. But the fact of the matter is, it's like Enoch has a programming inside of him that basically whatever's in Gemma's head, it's such a big secret that, like, no one can know it. So he's willing to even go as far as killing someone. But Gemma's like, why would any of us program him to do this? It's like, well, you wouldn't know because your memories are blocked, so you wouldn't remember that you did something like that. And so they test it out. Enoch, sure blown, goes into full killer mode. And it's like, she's like, well, you don't have to do this. He's like, you programmed me to do this. So it's like Gemma's the one in particular that did this. So they had to fight him, but now, and I love it. It's almost like they add a little comedy element to it as they're trying to find a roundabout way of dealing with the whole Enoch situation. Like, you know, they're trying to be stealthy. He still finds them. And they end up having to fight him every time. They bring the whole team in at one point in time. And I love that, like, everyone gets their shit pushed in. And they're like, where'd he get all those weapons from? Is Deke dead? Yep. Should I feel bad about that? And it's like, no, because, you know, basically the whole thing will restart. It's also messed up because it's like Deke is the only one that ended up dying in that particular scuffle because everyone else was still alive. So they were trying to find, like, ways around that and try. I just thought that was kind of interesting. I even love the whole thing of they're trying to get Yo-Yo involved too, and he's like, because that was when they were trying to figure it out. That was before when they were trying to figure out who was behind it, and he was going to cut Yo-Yo out to get her out, and it's like, oh, maybe Yo-Yo can help, and it's like, he's like, because you didn't do it, right? He's like, because you would tell me if you did it. She's like, it seems like I missed a lot. It's like, well, yeah, you know, Matt got blinded, you know, Gemma's died a couple times, you know, so, and just as Yo-Yo's about to get out, it's like, nope, which is so sucky because she just unlocked the full potential of her power last episode and she didn't really get a chance to really fully show it off again. And I just love Coulson because the moment he gets her free, the loop starts again. He's like, son of a, you know, so but I love that, like, you know, Daisy and Daniel had a very heart-to-heart because, like, when she wakes up at one point, because she had asked him beforehand, she's like, she was just, prior in the episode, she had asked him, like, why do you care? He's like, because you don't. And then, like, she kind of gets in, she's like, all right, I could take a loop to really kind of, like, break this down. Like, she was trying to understand, like, why Daniel does what he does. Because she's like, you've helped me out without, you know, always saying yes, you know. She's like, because you're just going to accept this whole time loop thing. For him, it's like, she's like, does nothing faze you? He's like, oh, it does. It's just, I'm not showing it on my face. The fact of the matter is, for him, it's like, all of this is crazy, you know, stuff. But obviously, he chose to kind of stay with them. And this is kind of, you know, almost every day for them in a weird enough way. But it is a situation for him that he kind of breaks down like, oh, I know people like you. She's like, you do. He's like, basically people that kind of almost like put everything else before them. Like, that's why he said, like, because you don't. Because you're one of those people that, basically the metaphor is just kind of almost like, you're one of those people that run straight to the fire, not caring about yourself, but caring about other people. So basically, you need someone there that, like, you're always the person who runs head faced into a wall. You need someone to be there to kind of pick you up. Because you know when he's saying that, you're like, I'm sure one of the people he's talking about is Peggy. I'm sure, like, Daisy kind of reminds him a lot of. And obviously him talking about, like, oh yeah, I don't want to be that for everyone, you know, just you know, because you also have everything going on, plus the whole powers thing where you're able to just kind of shake stuff, you know, which is pretty impressive and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, there things kind of building up between, like, you could already tell that there was already something there. And I'm like, this episode kind of leaning into that, because even like the next loop, because it's like, all right, they try to do things, but it's like, because Daniel was working with the others to kind of keep Enoch busy. So it's like, all right, before that, you know, well, when that ended up happening, it wasn't fast enough. So Enoch ended up catching up to him. It's like, all right, we're going to have to do this, like, faster next time. And the next loop, she just kisses him and it's like, it's nice. It's like, all right, now we got to trap a space robot. I just love that. It's like, oh, we just kissed and wait, trapping space. Oh, what? It's moving a million miles per hour. But the fact of the matter is, you know, they end up getting the device out of Gemma, and then in that moment, like, she remembers everything, and then it's like, okay, like, there is a way to stop the time drive situation, but what it would mean is taking something from Enoch, and the thing they would be taking is basically his heart, and it's like, it will kill him, and it's like. But then Gemma starts remembering other stuff too. She's like, what have I done? What have I done? She starts crying. And I'm like, we did not get into that, which I'm like, I'm assuming Gemma, like, because Gemma never really expressly explained, like, how long it's been since she actually saw the team. Like, how much is, like, in between when they got reunited after everything between her and Fitz and all that, like, this mission and everything. She never explained. I'm assuming, like, she did some stuff that she's not proud of to get there. Maybe it's stuff related to Fitz, you know, maybe it isn't just about hiding Fitz's location. Maybe there's something else to that, or whatever the case may be. She remembered something that made her break down. We never got an explanation to that. Like, Daisy and Coulson will remember that. No one else will. So the question then becomes like, well, what is it? What else is there that she saw, you know? So I thought that was kind of interesting. So obviously the next loop is kind of like, all right, we got this heavy ass decision. And so it's a situation of like, okay, so they get, you know, she's like, you know, Daisy's got this on her conscience, because it's so interesting, because it's that thing of, you know, because now it ends up being like they're 1 kilometer away. It's like, this it's do or die now. Like, if they have to do this, they have to do it now, because they won't get any other chances after this, because they got maybe another loop within them, you know, before they reach the vortex and everything. And obviously Daisy's just calmly, like, doing everything, you know, she's learned from the time loop and it's like, don't worry guys, it's gonna be okay. And so she calls Enoch and Gemma and Deke to be there with her and Coulson, and so they kind of basically break it down about what happened. And it's like, the fact is, Enoch, without hesitation, removes the device. And they're like, no, like, you'll die. But he's like, the fact of the matter is, I am willing to do this for you guys because you're my friends. And he's like, I'd like to think Fitz would do it for me, that any of you would do it for me. And it's just, like, heartbreaking. So it's like, they kind of have to, you know, go along with everything. And obviously for him, it's like he's starting to power down and he ends up falling back. But, you know, Daisy and Coulson are there for him, because it's like, you don't have to be alone, we'll be here for. And because I thought it was so interesting, because like for him, he's lived for so long, obviously he's always observed so many humans and stuff like that. He's always been alone, but it's like in this moment he realizes like he feels lonely. Like he never felt that until he met this particular team of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, you know. And it's this really like heavy, like heartbreaking moment of him dying, because it's just because let's also not forget, like he's also sacrificing himself, you know, for them in the future. But like, you know, this is even different because they've even grown even closer then, because they were close enough to Enoch, they were friend-ish, but like now, like even he's part of the team, he's part of his family. And for him, it's like, you know, for him, he feels that now, because it's like it hurts a little bit, but what scares him the most is the whole thing of like, you know, at the end of it all, he's going to have to be alone. But, you know, that's why Coulson and Daisy like, that's why we're going to be here with you until the very end. But, you know, it's like, yeah, but even then, like, that's a kindness in itself. But it's like, but at the end, I'm still going to be the one who has to leave by myself. I'm still going to be alone in the end. And then Coulson's like, I get it. Like, he's like, you're right. Like, he's like, because obviously he's been through that. It's like, but the fact of the matter is that feeling's only temporary, because honestly, it's actually going to be even heavier and harder for the people you're leaving behind, because those feelings got to eventually wash away of like being alone in the end. But they're the ones that have to carry on the fact is that you're not going to be there anymore. And I was just like, oh, it's a heartbreaking conversation, and it's a whole thing of like, you know, Enoch being like, yeah, that is the hard thing about it. Kind of either staying, it's you know, staying or leaving both are hard, but probably staying is probably like the hardest thing, you know. But the fact of the matter is, I forgot what it was that Daisy said, and I thought was so impactful. I'm so pissed at myself for forgetting, but basically, she was saying something that didn't just resonate with Enoch; it resonated with Coulson too. Kind of almost being like, you aren't just like a machine, that, you know, you are more than that, you know, you are a good friend, you know, so don't think, because basically, you know, because Coulson is very existential, kind of thinking of himself just as a machine and stuff like that, you know, and Enoch closing his eyes and being like, Fitz, he was my best friend, and they're like, you've been a good friend to Fitz, you've been a good friend to all of us, and it's just, because also there was a whole conversation about, right, I forgot, I remember now, because the whole conversation came about because for him it's like, he's willing to do this so they'll all survive, like whatever sacrifice he has to make, but he's like, your friends will survive, but this team won't. And Daisy's like, what? He's like, I've seen the future, like it's part of a cycle, and he's like, I've seen that cycle for so long, and Coulson said, and now you're part of this team, so that makes you part of that cycle. You're no longer just on the outside looking in. You're on the inside of it. And the whole point was like Daisy was kind of bringing up the fact of the matter is kind of saying that, you know, the same thing kind of applies to Coulson. Is kind of what that whole conversation was. So, but now that begs the question, like, well, what happens at the end of all of this with him saying that? Him saying, like, I've seen the future, and knowing, like, this is their last mission, so what that means in the grand scheme for this team, you know? And it's just, like, them being there at the end with Enoch, I'm like, oh. I was like, because it was such a fun episode. Granted, like I said, it had its seriousness to it as well, but at the same time, it was like, that was, like, just heartbreaking. And it's just, like, so... like I said, like, obviously they managed to survive. Like, obviously they're going to have to break it down to everybody about what ended up happening. So, but they escaped, you know, the time loop and the vortex. And obviously that's the thing about these type of things too. The whole point, once again, the whole Groundhog Day thing is about you becoming a better person. Not like they were bad people, but it's like, I think this was, once again, like Coulson, you know, kind of dealing with his existential stuff, and, you know, once again, what this means to him, like having to see his friends die one by one. It's like him preparing, like mentally, it's like, oh, having to prepare myself for the fact is I might have to keep going when you guys all, like, that's, you know, that's something that's kind of been put out there that he's kind of having to, you know, now Daisy at the very least knows that's definitely how he feels. So, and obviously Daisy and Daniel, like, so that's something else that's grown from this. It's like, oh, sadly you won't remember the conversation we had, but I will, so that's going to be a little weird and awkward. And because I don't remember her kissing him, like that was part of a previous loop. So yeah, it was definitely part of a previous loop. So the question then becomes like, all right, so you remember that, but he doesn't. So it's almost like a Flash thing, because that ended up happening in the Flash on some occasions where like Barry gets Iris, but they ended up kind of undoing time to a certain extent, you know. So it's a whole thing. But like I said, it's a fun yet heavy ass episode, you know. So I'm curious to see where this goes, especially because, you know, Nathaniel. I like, because last episode they said that was Cheyenne's daughter, but I was like, wait, what? Once again, it's been forever since I've seen the earlier seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, she had I didn't realize that was, like, actually her daughter, because or was it just kind of like, oh, you were kind of like a daughter, Gian, or was it more of a thing of that is her actual daughter, because Nathaniel's like, oh, like, basically wait till your sister sees, so I'm assuming that has to, referring to Daisy, you know. Like I said, I'm going to I might look that up, I might not, or someone could end up telling me in the comments down below. I'll probably have looked it up by then, but still. Is that like her being legitimately Jiayan's daughter, or was it just a situation of like, oh, she was kind of like a daughter? Whatever the case may be, they're kind of arming up on their end, so it's going to be interesting to see where, especially because like I'm assuming they're going to be back in the 80s, like right where they left off. I mean, granted, who knows? They might be off time frame wise, like because it might be like a couple days, weeks, months later, or maybe it's kind of roughly around the same time they left. Who knows? So they've had time to train and prepare, because it's obviously, I think this is going to be an opportunity for Daisy to kind of like get close to her mom to a certain extent. Like she's probably going to run into her mom because of all this, but regardless, it's going to be really interesting to see where all this stuff ends up playing out. You know, before I end this, now I'm taking time to think about what Enoch's words are. I'm wondering, is it going to be a situation where the entire team ends up in different time frames, in like time periods, like they end up getting separated like that in different time? Like some people end up in like maybe like the future, others end up in the past. Like maybe that's what that means, or just like what exactly it means for this all to come to an end. You know, that's where my mind was immediately. But you know, like I said, we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good